Okay, here's a video to help you work through homework number 42. So given a quadratic equation in vertex form, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the constant from the right side over to the left side. So if they're adding 4, I'm going to subtract 4 from both sides to get it into our vertex form here. What you're seeing in vertex form is you're seeing the opposite of h and the opposite of k. So if I'm looking for the vertex at hk, the opposite of -4 is +4. The opposite of -4 is also +4. So my vertex is at +4, +4. Taking a look at finding the x-intercept, this is probably the most challenging part of the problem. And so what we're going to do is we're going to set the y value equal to 0. We're going to rewrite this part of the equation in standard form, and then we're going to factor it. So working through this, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to FOIL or multiply together x minus 4 times x minus 4 to get x squared minus 8x plus 16. From there, what I would do is I would distribute the -1, so I'd multiply -1 to all three terms. And then lastly, I would combine my like terms. Okay. From there, I would factor it. So the first step in factoring is I'm going to factor out the -1. I want to make sure that x squared has a positive coefficient. And then I ask what multiplies to 12 and adds to -8. That's where I come up with the -6 and -2. And if these three factors multiply to 0, then one of the factors must be equal to 0. So I would add 6 to both sides to get x equals 6, add 2 to both sides to get x equals 2. The last part here is we're going to plug in 0 for x to get the y-intercept. When I do so and simplify, I get y equals -12. So for my graph, I have my vertex at 4, 4. I have my x-intercepts at 6 and 2. And then to get additional points, if I go 1 to the right, 1 squared is 1. If I go 1 to the left, 1 times 1 is also 1. Okay. The second part here is I'm given a quadratic equation in standard form. I would identify a, b, and c. I would use the formula -b over 2a to find the vertex. When I do that, I get +1. I then plug back in +1 into my function and get -4. So my vertex is at 1, -4. My x-intercepts, when I factor what multiplies to -3 and adds to -2, it's -3 and +1. And I can solve that to get 3 and -1. And lastly, when I plug in 0 for x, I get -3 for y. To the other side here, given a function in vertex form, the vertex is at +4, -1. If I plug in 0 for y, I'm going to rewrite this part in standard form, so I'm going to multiply x minus 4 times x minus 4. I would then combine my like terms, factor, set each factor equal to 0, and solve. The last part here, if I plug in 0 for x, my y value is 15. Given the equation in standard form, I'm going to use my little formula -b over 2a to get the x value of the vertex. Plug x back into the function to get y. So my vertex is at -3, -1. If I plug in 0 for y and factor it, after I solve it, I'll get -2 and -4. And lastly, if I plug in 0 for x, my y value is +8.